you can't screw it up because it's just been done so many times by so many different people forever that there's not one way to make it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You can kind of invoke the ancestors, right? When you're making bread, because you can just feel that this is like the traditional way that it was done. And did they have recipes online? No, right?
No, they had them painted on the walls. Like,
and I mean, so many of our cultures and traditions just were all word of mouth, and it was just an evolution. And so you can just pick up wherever you are and start. That's a really good thing to be able to do.
Hey guys, so today's episode is sponsored by Baja Gold Co. It's one of my personal favorite salts. And Baja Gold is the world's most flavorful sea salt with naturally lower sodium and industry-leading macro and trace minerals to support daily performance. Welcome to Modern Ancestral Mamas. We are Corey and Christine, two millennial moms on a mission to bring ancestral wisdom to modern motherhood. Okay, guys. So Corey and I wanted to do an entire series on grains and how to source them, the difference between freshly milled and store-bought flour, the nutrient quality of grains, what is sourdough, all the stuff. So if you're interested in learning more about bread specifically, we do have an episode on that. It's episode 39, and it's called How to Choose the Best Bread, and we will link that in show notes. So you could listen to that before the grain series. And just a reminder, if you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and share this interview with your friends and family. And for all our traditional podcasters out there, like myself, I like to listen, not watch things. Leave us a comment. It is the easiest way to support our show and make sure that others learn about it as well. Okay, so today's ghost. Wow, I said today's ghost. Okay, today's guest. She is not a ghost. She is.
I'm here.
Yeah, she's here.
She's real.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Today's guest is the queen of sourdough, Courtney Queen of Butterforall.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and I'm alive. Yay.
I've never said that one before.
No, okay. You never have, but that's funny. Okay. I do want to actually add to that. We are doing this whole series on grains, and we'll have, a couple other people talking about it, Courtney included. And part of the reason is that Christine and I, and on the show, we kind of are proponents of the Weston A. Price style of eating, right? And so many people in the health space and in the health sphere will tell you that grains are bad and bread is bad and gluten is bad and all of these things. And so this whole series is kind of to debunk is maybe a strong word, but like inform you so that you can make whatever choices are best for your family, so that you have all the information and you can go forth as an informed consumer and eater. So, okay, I'm going to give a introduction for Courtney, and Christina and I just wanted to say that when we started talking about this series, Courtney was absolutely on the top of our list for people to talk to, so we're really excited to have you.
Aw, thank you.
And she's the sweetest, and if you've ever met her, you are very lucky. Okay, Courtney Queen is the chef and author behind the real food website Butterforall. She is well versed in the Weston A. Price Foundation's food philosophies and has been making sourdough for over 22 years. So that is far before it was popular and trendy. On her website, she writes recipes and guides highlighting traditional and ancestral ingredients with a time-honored slow food cooking style. She's passionate about regenerative agriculture, supporting organic small farms, culinary sustainability, and clean food. Courtney also offers consultations to both individuals and businesses. Okay, let's do really quickly. Courtney, would you tell us, you have one daughter. Would you tell us how old she is?
She's 11.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So we are, I forgot that because she and my daughter are the same age.
I was going to say, yeah, we all have pretty much 11-year-olds. I'll have an 11-year-old in 2 weeks.
Oh, fun. Yes. Mm-hmm. It's a really fun age because it's that really nice time before they get too angsty. But
Yeah.
they have a lot of energy and they have a lot of ideas and they want to do a lot of things. So it is.
Yeah, and they're fun to talk to at that age. Like you can actually hold an actual conversation.
Yes.
I'm loving this age.
That personal monologue and their own personality and everything. So it's really sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So we start the show with a roundtable question that is kind of like an icebreaker to get us all going. And so the question for today is, what is your favorite grain product to eat? Christine wrote this that says no shame. I feel absolutely no shame with grains. I'm just totally going to throw that out there.
I mean,
so
like,
you need the caveat, but
say your favorite one.
Okay.
You want me to go first?
If you want to, sure.
Sure. Without a doubt, the flaky, buttery croissant. Okay? A croissant, because you get that really delicate crumb, lots of layers, there's butter. It's amazing, right? And it can go with anything. You can make it savory, you can make it sweet, but just by itself, that crusty, flaky crispiness, by far, a real true sweet cream butter croissant, the best. Yeah.
I did not even think of that.
I know. Now everybody's just going to agree with you. I have tried to make croissants and found it to be, obviously it's very difficult, because it's like a French pastry and the French are known for being fancy, but
it's labor intensive. There's a lot of
intensive
folding and refrigerating and folding again and rolling and all of the pieces. So yeah, it is a process, but the result speaks for itself, right? So
this is one of those things you need to make in like mega batch where you make it once a year and then you freeze them all. Right?
Exactly. Yes.
I don't know though. Can you do that? Can you freeze them and then bake them, and do they turn out okay?
I mean, it would depend on, whether or not your starter does well in the freezer. If you wanted to try to freeze them, like partly proofed, and then let them like finish proofing when you bring them out of the freezer, it could definitely work. It just kind of depends on your starter and whether or not it bounces back from freezer. I mean, if you want to do sourdough, if you're doing just a yeast croissant, you can freeze them. Yeah.
But you could freeze them after they were baked, right?
You could freeze them after they're baked, but they are very delicate.
Yeah.
So, once they're frozen,
you get them like banging around in the freezer.
They will get bruised and break down, and so you'll get some crumbs for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can make sourdough croissants.
Definitely. It's just, you're just using a rich dough, and, you're just using your sourdough starter as the yeast. And if you have a good, strong sourdough starter that's well balanced, then they're not going to be overly sour. They're going to just have that nice round flavor that sourdough brings.
Okay, Christine, you go next.
Well, I was going to say actually a chocolate chip cookie.
Yeah.
But now that she said croissant, I'm thinking, oh man, that's very true. So I don't know. And full confession, I mean, Corey knows this, but I'm a horrendous baker. And so the odds of me making a chocolate chip cookie and it coming out well are pretty slim. So like they never turn out the same when I make them. I don't make them often enough, I think. But every time I make them, something different happens. So I have yet to achieve what I like about a chocolate chip cookie, which is chewy and soft and buttery. That's what I like about chocolate chip cookies. And then you have to dip it in raw milk. It's not a chocolate chip cookie if you don't dip it in raw milk, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
So
yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, I have a really good recipe for sourdough chocolate chip cookies. It's not my recipe, but it is like the internet's best recipe, and it's from a boy who bakes. And I'll just give him a shout out. I don't know him, but he has the best sourdough chocolate chip cookies. They're browned butter, and then I sub coconut sugar. He calls for just regular cane sugar and brown sugar, but I sub 100% coconut sugar. They come out amazing. So look it up. You might have luck with his recipe. He's brilliant. So, yeah.
Okay, so my favorite, I don't know. I love bread and all that stuff, but I think I'm gonna go with a lard and butter pie crust.
Oh.
Definitely.
With, savory or sweet. I don't know that I really care. I do really love. I had a friend in high school that we baked together all the time. We were both in 4-H and we were always entering these baking competitions with 4-H and stuff. It was so fun, but we had very, very different ideas about pie crust. She hated it. She hated pie crust. And she was always like, we don't even need to put it in there. We can just basically make a cobbler. And I'm like, what? No, this is like the best part. Okay, this blows my mind. Anybody tell me if you agree or disagree here. But when I was growing up and we would make pie crust, you slice off the extra, right? And then you make pie crust cookies where you put cinnamon sugar on top of the little bits of pie crust and you bake them in the oven. And they're just, they're usually small because it's just crust. It's just scraps. But they're like buttery and flaky and they just are so tender and they're slightly sweet because you put that cinnamon sugar on them. And they're just the best thing. My friend would throw the crust scraps away, and it just always really upset me.
Not cool.
Not okay. She's going to listen to this and be like, geez, Corey, I didn't realize you felt so strongly about it.
But I agree with you, Corey. I do. I agree with you because a pie crust cookie and you get that crispy layer of cinnamon sugar on top and then it's kind of flaky and poofy.
Yes.
So good. Yes.
It's so good.
I've never done that. I'm going to have to try this.
Do you throw the pie crust scraps away?
I don't think
Christine?
I throw it away. I think depending on what I'm making, I think for example, if it's I don't know, I think I save it or I'll let the kids play with it. I
like
literally
Play-Doh?
just let them play with it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think I've thrown it away. And if I throw it away, it would be in the compost bucket. So.
Okay.
Wait, but Corey, okay, question really fast. I know that we want to move on, but I want to know about the pie crust thing. Okay. What grain are you using to make your pie crust? Because for
I remember
while,
you had a problem with it, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I had kamut, and so I was freshly milling kamut and doing that, and I think I got it down possibly to work. Again, it's not very consistent. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and I don't really know what I'm doing wrong. I have to pay more attention to these things. But one time I used einkorn, and it definitely did not work. It was a disaster. It was very hard. I'm trying to think. Yeah, einkorn didn't work as well as the kamut. Any suggestions, guys?
Courtney would definitely be able to explain this better, I think. But
Like I think kamut is a little bit more sandy. So, it's the granular texture of it. I think, you just need to add a little bit more water. Einkorn is just so slack. It's just really hard to judge how much water to put in. So that could have been why, but I've been making some einkorn pie crusts with my sourdough pie crust recipe, and those have been turning out really well. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
it's such a good recipe. Really well.
Yeah.
The one that's on your website?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll try that because I'm out of my kamut grains, and now I have einkorn grains, and I need to work through those. So
yeah, that's great. I think it's just a matter of playing around with the amount of water that you're adding to a pie dough.
Hydration.
And yeah, it's because even if you're making an all-purpose pie crust with refined flour, all flours are going to have different amounts of hydration in the flour to begin with. So, you can follow a recipe and it might say 3 tablespoons of water, but coming from a baking perspective, you're going to start with 1 tablespoon. You're going to kind of work that in. You're going to add the 2nd tablespoon. You're going to work that in, and you're going to see where you end up because you might need to cut the water a little bit or add a little bit more. Pie crust is just tricky that way. You really just want it at that perfect stage where it's just clumping together. And then, those whole grains, especially freshly milled, they're going to take a little bit more time to hydrate.
So when I'm rolling it out, part of my problem is it's breaking as I'm rolling it out.
Right.
There's no gluten in, or not none, but there's very small amount of gluten in einkorn, so you're going to have a harder time getting it to stick together.
Yeah, especially with freshly milled. I wanted to bring all of that in when we talk about it, because the bran, that you're milling into the starch when you're milling a whole grain is very sharp and acts like little swords and cuts the gluten up even more. So it's harder to form gluten development with whole grain.
Mm-hmm.
So any tips for how to roll the pie crust out for an einkorn pie crust?
If you want to keep it whole grain, I would say it needs a little bit extra hydration. If you are comfortable with sifting some of the bran out, you might have a better experience.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And that can just be done with like a normal, mesh sieve, and just put your flour in there and sift it and remove a little bit of that bran, just so you have a little bit more of the starch, coming together and allowing for the gluten development.
Okay. That's super helpful.
Okay. Let's give Courtney an opportunity to kind of give us her backstory. Like how did we get to the point of having Butterforall, and which is an awesome name, but like, how did you even come up with that name? Like, let's go
Okay.
on your story.
Okay. Thank you. That's really nice of you. It's fun to tell my story. I don't get to tell it very often. So it probably starts all the way back when I was a child, and I was obsessed with cooking and wanted to have a restaurant. It was called Courtney's Country Kitchen. Okay.
Oh my gosh, how cute.
And I would make menus, and I would have my family order off of them. And this was when I was maybe 9, 10, 11 years old. And I would, make pancakes and scrambled eggs and top ramen and just whatever I knew how to make at that time. And it would all be on the menu, and I'd decorate it and everything. So I always knew that I wanted to cook. I always knew that I loved cooking. I shouldn't say I always knew I wanted to cook, but I knew I loved cooking. I thought maybe someday I wanted to have a restaurant. And so then I started working in the field, and I did a lot of restaurant jobs. I went to culinary school and met my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and he bought for me a packet of the Gold Rush sourdough starter. This was back in 2002.
So can you explain what that is for people who don't know?
Sure. It's like a dehydrated sourdough starter, supposedly from the Gold Rush era of, in San Francisco. So a really old starter, but it's been, dehydrated and sold in a little packet that you rehydrate. So I didn't really know anything about sourdough at the time, and he gave this to me for Christmas, and I started it, and I kept a very weak and sad sourdough starter going for a long time. It was so sour and so liquidy, and I wasn't a very good baker, but I kept plugging away at it. And then I went to culinary school. I decided that I really wanted to hone my craft, and I was tired of just working, manager jobs. I wanted to go more into a chef career. And so then I took a couple baking classes in culinary school. I learned so much about baking. And I started kind of putting the pieces together with sourdough, because I was entirely self-taught with sourdough. I didn't have any instruction. It was before the internet, basically. I mean, I didn't have a phone till I was 29, and I wasn't online. I wasn't looking at recipes or doing anything like that. And I didn't even check out a book at the library. I mean, I was kind of just throwing the ingredients together and trying things. Wow. So when I graduated from culinary school, I was a better baker, but I wasn't a great baker. And we went and lived in San Francisco, and I worked in some nice restaurants in San Francisco, and all the while I was maintaining this kind of sad, pathetic sourdough starter, and getting bricks like you do for the first few years or more. And this is 5 or 6 years into my sourdough experience, and I was still baking really kind of terrible bread, but it was edible and it was fun. So my sister calls me. She's living outside of Austin, and she goes, "Courtney, you have to read this book, Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon." she's talking all about raw milk. And I had no idea. She's like, you're going to love this book. And I'm getting raw milk from the farm down the street. And I'm like, wow, that's so cool. So this was right around the time when Mark McAfee was starting his organic pastures program in California, and raw milk was available in the store. And you could just walk in and buy a half gallon of raw milk in the store, which, I mean, I think you still can in California, but it's so nice to be able to do that. And so I started drinking raw milk, and I started learning about Weston A. Price. And, you know, I kind of took this deep dive where I had been really focused on culinary and ingredients and cooking, but I hadn't really pieced together the health aspect. I knew more about kind of just the standard food pyramid guidelines. So it really kind of opened my mind, opened the doors to learning more about nutrient density and all of those things. And I was so pleased because I was thinking, this is my style. This is what I love. Like, I love butter. I love milk. I love cheese. I love meat. I don't want to give any of these things up. I want to incorporate all of these healthy foods into my diet. And so it was really a nice segue into that. And then I took a little break from cooking, and when I decided to become a mom. And I mean, it would be a hard thing to do, to work a 60-hour week with a small child. So I took a break, and we moved up to Oregon. And this was when I was really able to focus in on my own recipes instead of, you know, working for other chefs or, you know, having a restaurant kind of dictate what I was to serve. I was able to really focus in on my own recipes, and I started writing these, you know, Weston A. Price style recipes, nourishing tradition style recipes. And I was cooking for my family, and it was just this really lovely time. And I was doing a lot of baking, and I really nailed sourdough. I like figured it out because I had this time to do it. So that was only, you know, 10 or 11 years ago. So I had my starter for so long, just making mediocre bread. And then I really kind of nailed it in this time when I was staying home with my daughter. And I thought, I have time, I'm going to start a blog. And I was really into, you know, food and I love butter. And so I was like, it's kind of like a proclamation, like butter for all. It's like, everybody get some butter in your body, you know, and
you get some butter and you get some butter and you get some butter.
Butter for all. Yes. So it started as a hobby, and I just started writing and publishing my recipes, and I was terrible at blogging. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I still don't, but I do the best I can, and I publish my recipes when I have them and when I have the time, and it's just become a really nice way for me to stay home and work while also, you know, contributing to the family by homeschooling and homesteading and having the chickens in the garden and everything else that we do. So yeah, that's kind of the whole story. So thank you for listening to that long drawn out.
I think it's great. I love being able to hear people, like how people got to where they are, because I think it adds so much richness to what the other things that we're going to talk about.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been a fun journey. I think really, you know, Nourishing Traditions really pushed me in a direction, and I was so pleased that I took that direction. It was before anybody was really doing a lot of sourdough on the internet. There weren't a whole lot of recipes being published in that space. There were some, but not a whole lot. And so it was a fun time to be pioneering that. Now it's saturated, of course. And that's wonderful. I'm happy that people are baking so much at home. But it was fun to be there at the beginning. Yeah.
I remember when I was first learning how to make sourdough, it was, let me think, it must have been like 5 years ago, probably five or 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. Probably closer to 6. Sorry. Anyway, I watched a bunch of stuff on the internet. I read as much as I could. And I was still getting those nasty bricks, you know, where like it wouldn't rise, or like it would look great coming out, and then you'd cut into it and it was like all flooded at the bottom here. And I was so frustrated. So I go on this Facebook forum to ask a question. And what I was shocked by is that I was trying to make sourdough for my daughter who couldn't eat gluten, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the entire point for me with sourdough was not to be making these beautiful, perfect loaves. It was to make a long fermented sourdough bread that was like as long as I could possibly ferment it, to make it digestible for my daughter who couldn't eat gluten. I was at this point in her life, in our food journey, where I was like desperate to be eating regular bread. And I had learned what gluten-free bread has, all of this extra stuff in it, and all these gluten-free products, they're basically trying to create gluten, the structure of gluten, the chew of gluten, the taste of gluten without having gluten. So
Right.
first of all, like back when gluten-free first started, it all sucked. It was all crap, and tasted terrible. And then they started trying to add stuff. But then to be able to make a gluten-free product taste like gluten, you have to add all this stuff. And I started going, I don't actually want, my family to be eating all of these extra things. So then I learned about sourdough and started trying to do sourdough. And it was so surprising to me that most people were there to just make pretty bread. And I was like, no, like there's so much more to this. There's so much more to it. So,
Yeah.
I would love it if you would kind of address first of all, what is sourdough? And then what makes it different? Like, what is the process doing to the grains to make them, to where my daughter who had to be gluten-free could eat it?
Sure. Yeah, well, it's so interesting that you say that, because there are so many people who are missing out on the nutrition side of sourdough. They think it's just this fun artisan bread to make, and it maybe tastes a little different, and they look at it as a style of bread, when really it's a style of baking, right? It's not a style of bread. It's a way to bake. You're using a sourdough starter, which is a community of microorganisms, right? The yeast, the wild yeast, the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and the lactic acid bacteria. And those two microorganisms working together, and there's usually more than one kind of yeast and more than one kind of bacteria in a sourdough starter. But what they do is it's perpetual. So it's a culture that you're maintaining, like a kombucha or something like that. And you can use this because it's just a yeast factory. You're basically cultivating a little jar of yeast to leaven your bread. You can use it for all different styles of baking. And so, yes, I think a lot of people are just think, oh, pretty sourdough bread. They don't realize that sourdough is actually a style, and what it's doing behind the scenes is very remarkable. The yeast contributes in its own way. It adds the gases that make bread rise, and it does add some alcohol, which contributes to the sour flavor. And then the lactic acid bacteria, its byproduct of eating the starch and the carbohydrates in grain is to make lactic acid. And that acid is responsible for the sour flavor. But beyond that, it breaks down gluten. It breaks down the anti-nutrients that are in the grain, allowing the vitamins and minerals to be absorbed in your digestive tract. And it's just so beneficial. And it can do other things too. I mean, it actually takes care of a lot of the mycotoxins from mold that are maybe present in flour, any lectins, tannins, oxalates, like all those things that you hear, all those buzzwords out there. Sourdough can actually help neutralize those during the fermentation process. So it does this amazing work behind the scene, and modern bread that's using isolated yeast isn't getting that benefit at all. It doesn't have a long fermentation. It doesn't have time to build up the acid, and therefore it's not breaking down any of those hard to digest proteins or the anti-nutrients or helping free up minerals or doing any of that work that the sourdough starter is doing.
Wow. Every time I hear it, I'm always in awe. I mean, I feel like I know this stuff. I know what sourdough does, but it's such a good reminder to hear again. Especially because I like how Corey started at the beginning of the show talking about how it's very common in the health movement for grains to be demonized. Mm. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit about that. Like, what is your opinion on that? And what are your thoughts on grains, and are they bad for us?
I think the way that we treat them in our modern society is not healthy. So again, there's just so much mass-produced grain foods, and they aren't necessarily traditionally prepared. So you're not getting any real benefit from them. They're adding a lot of starch and carbohydrate to your diet, sugar, but they're not really providing much nutritional value because either they've been highly refined, or even in the case of whole grain, they aren't being utilized in a way that's going to actually free up those nutrients that are in the grain. So I would say for anybody who isn't interested in doing sourdough or maybe making traditional grains, then, with soaking, sprouting, or fermenting, those three ways of treating grains to make them more nutrient dense and more bioavailable, then I would say you should limit grains. If you're not willing to do those things and you don't want to go to the trouble of it, then you should look at grain as a once in a while treat. It shouldn't be a staple of your diet. The food pyramid is wrong. It's not the bottom. It's not the base of the pyramid. It should be up at the top with sugar, and you should have a croissant when you're in France, or, once in a while when you make them, and you should have a piece of birthday cake, when you're celebrating your kid's birthday or whatever, but it should not be every day we're having peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, every day we're having pasta, every day we're having, some sort of refined grain. So I think for those people who are kind of living the traditional American diet, then I would say, limit grains, because there's not really a whole lot of value there. They're not a nutrient dense food. But if you're willing to go through the process of transforming grains through soaking, souring, or sprouting, then you are going to have a more nutrient dense product. Therefore, you can add it in a little bit more regularity to your diet. So I still don't think it should be the base of the pyramid, but it could be somewhere in the middle. And it doesn't have to be, something that you only have once in a while. Maybe you have it more often, several times a week, or even every day in small amount. But you're giving yourself the nutrition of it instead of just the empty carbs. So I think that kind of lays out how my philosophy on it. I eat sourdough and grains very sparingly. I don't feel well on them, to be perfectly honest. And even though I'm a baker and I bake a lot of bread, and I was running a cottage bakery business for a while, and I was baking in quantity, I wasn't really eating it. A small slice here and there with butter, a little slice of toast or something like that. But for the most part, I limit. Yeah.
So, I want to ask a question about like your philosophy with your daughter. Do you also limit it with her, or are you kind of giving her a little bit more freedom to feel that out on her own?
Well, she loves bread. She loves bread. She loves every bready thing. I think probably like every kid, right?
Yeah, most children.
She's your daughter. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
If I had you making all of these things, I think I would feel the same way.
And how tempting, right? I mean, 40 cinnamon rolls, and
she's home with you, right? She's homeschooled. Like, she's around.
Yes. So, we don't eat any conventional wheat products. Once in a while, if she's at a friend's birthday or something like that, she might have a cupcake or a piece of cake or something like that. We do a lot of fermented, like pancakes, things like that. It's easy. It's something that she can do now at her age. She makes pancakes and crepes and does those kinds of things. And once in a while, we have a loaf of bread around and we have a couple sandwiches and some toast, but it is not an everyday thing for our family. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's actually kind of how I feel about it, or that's how I do it in my home, mostly because Corey knows I'm not that good at it. But also because I think that grains have a place, and it's better if they're a little bit more limited, in my own personal opinion. So, I think last week or a couple weeks ago, I made like a cranberry orange loaf of bread. Oh my gosh, it was so good. It was so good. I was really sad. It was like the last batch of organic cranberries I had in my fridge. But I'll do something like that every once in a while. And I'm okay if it's, like you said, freshly milled and sourdough and all of those things. But the conventional breads really, oh man, they hurt my heart.
Yeah. And you appreciate it more when it's not an everyday occurrence. It takes on a little bit more of a special and celebratory feeling if you and I don't think you have to be like strict about it, but if you limit it a little bit, then it is a real treat and it is really wonderful. You make this beautiful loaf of bread, and it's like such a special feeling when you get to have it. So I like that too.
I think that there's something so interesting about when you put in all the work to make a loaf of bread, especially if it's sourdough, and it takes days. Like I always people always ask me, like, what's one way to save money on real food? And I'm like, you save all your little scraps of bread and stuff to make breadcrumbs. And I always joke that, like, I will literally like use my hand and like wipe off the counter and save those breadcrumbs. I'm like, because when you put in as much work as I do into making bread, like, that's precious.
Yeah.
That's like gold. The other thing that I think is really interesting about sourdough bread and particularly a long fermented homemade sourdough bread, as opposed to something that you could buy in a local bakery or something, the flavor profile is it's so much richer, and there's so much more complexity in that bread that is noticeable if you are, paying attention to it. And I find that most bread products, be it a regular yeasted bread or a sourdough bread, just lacks flavor.
Yes. Yeah, I think after you've been baking sourdough for a while and you've been eating a lot of sourdough baked goods, and especially if you're incorporating them into other things besides bread, like if your pancakes are also sourdough and your bagels and even your pie crust, right? You taste something else that's not, and it's like bland and boring. It doesn't really have anything going for it. And you wonder, why does anybody like this? It doesn't taste good. It doesn't taste like it. It's like cardboard. So yes, I agree with you on that.
I totally think that's true.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to like the basics. Okay. Walk us through the basics of sourdough. If I wanted to start, say I want to start baking bread, I don't have a starter. How do I get a starter? What supplies do I need? How do I make this happen?
Sure. So people overcomplicate it, I think, a lot. And I'll tell you one reason for that. And it's because when you're writing it out to write a recipe, you have to kind of explain it all. And
because it's new information, right? Like nobody knows how to do this unless you know how to do it.
And you have to give them some measurements, because people will be, well, I don't know how much to put in, right? And so then people think this is like a hard, fast rule. but it's not. It's bread, and bread is just flour, water, salt, and yeast, right? And in our case, sourdough starter. So I think that there's a trend to overcomplicate. So I would say that anybody who wants to get into it should just start. You need a sourdough starter. It's amazing if you can get one already established from a friend and have them show you some of how they make their bread, because then you have a firsthand experience and you have a jump start. But if you want to do the route of making your own sourdough starter, it's not hard because the yeast is already on the flour. And so if you get a little bit of a quality whole grain and mix it with, into a paste with some water and let it ferment, you're going to start to cultivate a yeast culture, a sourdough starter. And after a few weeks of feeding and discarding and kind of strengthening this starter, hopefully you'll have some yeast that will work for baking. So I realized that on your previous question, I didn't explain the sourdough starter very well because I got on a tangent, but it is this really important balance between yeast and bacteria. So when you're cultivating a sourdough starter, you want to favor the yeast because the bacteria is always going to outperform the yeast. It's just stronger in most cases until you've developed a yeast strain in your sourdough starter that is very balanced and strong. So the way you can favor the yeast is by feeding the sourdough starter regularly. And that means removing most of the fermented starter that's already soured and smells sour. That's the bacteria has done all that work. And start just keeping a little bit and giving it lots of fresh food, lots of fresh flour, lots of nice clean spring water or whatever you use for your sourdough starter, and encouraging the yeast. Because if you don't do that work in the beginning, then you're going to have a mediocre starter like I did. I'm not saying that it's all bad, because I did for 10 years, had a very, very sour, mediocre starter where the yeast just wasn't functioning or performing at the level that it could. And it wasn't until I started baking more often, really learning about how to keep that balance, that I really got that sourdough starter in tip-top shape. So you can start your own. You can buy a culture packet, like mine came from, this Gold Rush sourdough starter, supposedly. I just call it's 22 years old as far as I'm concerned, right? I'm not counting the 150 years that they claim this starter was already, alive. But I will say that a proven strain of yeast, a strong strain of yeast, is going to be just a boon to your sourdough starter. So if you can get a little bit of yeast from somebody else who has a really strong sourdough starter, I like to share mine. It's very, very balanced. When I put it in the refrigerator, it can stay in there for months without developing hooch. And the reason is because that bacteria is in check. The yeast are outperforming the bacteria, and that's what makes a sourdough starter really shine and really, live to its full potential, because the bacteria is going to suppress the yeast. So if you have a bacteria heavy starter, you'll know by the smell, it'll be very acidic, the alcohol smell, almost like acetone smell, and you'll get hooch, and you'll get a sluggish rise. Your bread won't rise as well. It might not rise at all, and so maintaining a sourdough starter is a process. You definitely have to put time and energy into maintaining it. But once it's there, it's very easy to care for. So you really put the time in the beginning.
Okay, so you're talking about a bacteria-heavy starter versus a yeast-heavy starter. How do you make that switch, or how do you fix it so that it is more yeast and not as much bacteria, so you're not getting the hooch, like you said, or the super sour smell?
Can we define hooch really quickly? You should define
hooch.
When your starter is like hungry, essentially, it'll develop this almost black, like grayish liquid on top.
Yes.
That's what hooch is.
It's just the alcohol oxidized flour and alcohol that's risen to the top. The yeast and bacteria have eaten all the starch in the flour, and they've released all of their byproducts, acids and alcohols, and it starts to condense at the top of your starter. The yeast basically goes dormant at that phase. So what you want to do, Christine, to answer that question is not let your yeast go dormant. Because when you let your yeast go dormant from lack of food, then it will be that much harder to revive them. They will come back, but what they do is they make kind of a shell around themselves to protect themselves, and they kind of turn into a spore. It's really interesting what yeast do. So they run out of food, they turn themselves into a spore, and then they're not going to come back until the conditions are good. So that's how they protect themselves in nature. So they're not going to come back and start growing again until they're in the right conditions. So you have to improve the conditions for those yeast. And that means getting rid of all of that lactic acid and so that the bacteria aren't overpowering the yeast anymore. So what to do is take a small amount of your starter and feed it, with a generous amount of fresh flour and water. And you're going to have to do that several times. And as soon as it starts to get sour, as soon as you start to see any hooch develop, you're going to do it again, because you really want to keep that bacteria in check, stop it from producing more lactic acid than the yeast can defend themselves against, basically. And you're wanting to boost that sugar in the mixture so that the yeast have some food, because the bacteria will eat it so fast.
If figuring out what to feed your family feels exactly like a never-ending to-do list, I get it. That is exactly why I created these 3 cookbooks just for you. 1 Chicken, 5 Meals shows you how to stretch a single bird into a week of nourishing, no-stress dinners. Nourishing Junk Food lets you create your favorites with using real food ingredients, no food dyes, no seed oils, and no other junk, just the flavors that you love. And in betweens, that's the secret weapon for snack time, lunch boxes, and all those what do I even feed them right now moments. All 3 are kid-friendly, mama approved, and made for real life. Get your copies today and turn your kitchen into a place that you actually enjoy. Go to fornutrientsake.com and use the code MAM15 for 15% off your order.
Hey mamas, do you want to add a new secret ingredient to your kitchen? Are you ready for this? Give Baja Gold sea salt a try today. We know our food is lacking minerals because of the depleted soil, so increase your mineral content of your food by using Baja Gold sea salt.
Baja Gold is an all-natural, unrefined sea salt from the Sea of Cortez. This salt is made the way it used to be, sun-dried with all of the ocean's minerals intact. No processing, no chemical flowing agents, nothing but pure, unrefined mineral salt.
And because of how and where they make their salt, Baja Gold is naturally lower in sodium and higher in minerals like magnesium and potassium. Moms, did you know that magnesium is a mineral used in over 300 bodily processes? Yeah, I know. We all know it is helpful for relaxing little bodies before bedtime.
Give Baja Gold a try today. Visit BajaGoldSaltCo.com to learn more. Check the show notes for the link and use the code MAM10 for 10% off.
That is MAM10 for 10% off. Okay, so you're saying fresh flour. Can you mill fresh grains? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, whatever you're feeding your sourdough starter with is fine. But with fresh grains, know that the process happens a lot faster. There's vitamins and minerals.
Okay.
Those feed bacteria just as much as they feed yeast, right?
Okay.
So the bacteria is going to start fermenting faster as well in a starter that it's being made with fresh grains.
Okay.
Yeah.
And full confession, I have definitely... so I still have the starter that I got from you a few years ago.
Oh, yay.
And it's working great. But there are times when I have store-bought flour and I feed it store-bought flour, and there's times when I have fresh grains and I feed it fresh grain flour, and I just sort of go back and forth depending on what I have. And I have no idea if that's what you're supposed to do, but
It's totally fine.
okay.
It's
All right.
total. Here's the thing, is that a sourdough starter doesn't really care what it's being fed as long as you're giving it enough. So I think, people who are real Puritans might want a 100% einkorn starter. And when I was baking, doing cottage bakery stuff, and I had customers who wanted 100% einkorn bread, and that's what I was bringing. I was bringing some loaves that were 100% einkorn, so I was using an einkorn starter for those, right? So because that's what people were asking for. But you can feed your sourdough whatever you want. And every time you feed your sourdough, think of it as you're making a levain. So if you want to take your sourdough starter and feed it with rye, because you want to start developing some different characteristics to make a rhubarb or a nice Danish loaf of some sort, then that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with creating an offshoot of your starter like a levain, or even just feeding your starter with what you have on hand. I don't think there's any problem with that. The yeast don't care. The bacteria don't care. The only thing is that pay attention to the different kinds of flour and how they're going to ferment. So an einkorn, a kamut, a rye, those are going to ferment faster. They just have more nutrients available for the microorganisms. And so it's easier to develop an acidic environment because of that fast fermentation. Whereas if you're feeding with a refined flour like all-purpose, you're going to get a lot longer, slower fermentation, strong, but just longer because there's just more food available for the yeast and bacteria. Does that make sense?
It does. It almost feels counterintuitive to me, though, that why would a store-bought flour result in you said longer fermentation?
Yeah, it'll just have more. It just has more starch just freed up.
Oh, never mind. Okay, that makes sense. It has more starch freed up because of the way it's... Okay.
Exactly. So that's why sometimes it is harder to maintain a freshly milled starter or a whole wheat starter, because they do ferment so much quicker. And even einkorn, even if you do use all-purpose einkorn, it's half the time of my all-purpose starter, because einkorn just has more minerals, and the yeast and bacteria are going to ferment faster in that environment.
Okay.
Also liquid, right? A more liquid starter ferments faster because the yeast and bacteria can move around easier in a liquid starter. So if you're having trouble with things fermenting too quickly, you can make your starter a lot less hydration, more like a bread dough, and you're going to have a slower, longer fermentation that will give you a little bit more time to kind of catch up. So you can adjust depending on what you're doing. Yeah.
Okay. So for the beginners out there, what would you say is the easiest sourdough recipe to make for a first-time baker? For like somebody who's not very confident, what would you say?
Yeah, I think going with just a really, really easy sourdough sandwich loaf. Well, actually, I always tell people to start with pancakes. And because you can't really screw them up. If they're too thin, they're crepes.
Yeah.
If they're too thick, you just add a little more milk. And so I think a long fermented pancake is a really good place to start. It's giving you an idea of the timing. Maybe you make your starter or your levain the night before with flour and water and sourdough starter. And then the next morning when it's nice and bubbly and fermented, you add your eggs and milk and coconut sugar and butter. And then you have your pancake batter. So it's a nice way to kind of ease into understanding fermentation and what to look for to see if your starter is actually active and bubbling away. But then when you're ready to make bread, a sandwich loaf or just a basic sourdough with just the 4 ingredients, flour, water, salt, and your sourdough starter is a great place to start. And I think you can look at recipes as guides. It's really important to get some ideas from other people, but you don't have to follow them. And it's really important to use your instinct and say, well, my dough feels really hard to work with. I can't knead this or stretch it, or maybe it needs a little more water. And that's okay. You can add more water. Ooh, it's really sticky. I can't get it off my fingers. I'm going to add a little more flour. It's always okay to play around with the recipe. And back to what we were talking about before with the hydrations of flour, different flours, different brands all start with a different amount of water in them to begin with. So they have different weights, and so sourdough is always going to be about adjustments and making those adjustments and trial and error. And you're never going to get a perfect loaf on your first try. If you do, it's a miracle. And it's just kind of keep going with it and teach yourself for what works with your sourdough starter in your kitchen, in your environment, because nobody else has those same, conditions that you have. So I think that's a big part that people get hung up on. They want their bread to look exactly like so-and-so, or they want it, they just expect too much from the beginning process. The beginning process, you're going to make some clunkers and you can use them as a doorstop or throw them out to the chickens. I mean, I was trying to do a fancy dinner for my mom with crab and really nice rolls, and they were so awful, so dense. They were just bricks, and I literally threw them out the door. I was so angry. So, it happens, and it's okay. But it is about trial and error in your own space with your own starter in your own conditions. And it's not hard once you realize what it is, because you're building gluten in the flour. The gluten is trapping the gases, and that's what makes bread rise. You want it to be the right texture, and a nice bread dough is kind of tacky. I would say like a good place to start is go for a tacky dough. No matter what the recipe says, just make it tacky, where it's not like coating your fingers in wet dough, and it's not crumbly or dry or hard to work with, but it's hydrated enough that it's tacky. Mm-hmm. And I think, paying attention to the hydration is probably the biggest part, because all of the different flours, especially when you're working with freshly milled flour, are going to need different hydrations.
Okay, a technical question. Do you think it is best to do, I don't remember the term, but where you mix your flour and your water before adding your starter and salt?
And autolyse.
Or is it better? Yeah, mm-hmm. Thank you. And autolyse. Yeah. And then, or is it better to just kind of throw everything together and mix it all up? There's so many different ways of doing it, and I've it kind of gets confusing as to what the best way to do it is. And I understand the whole, you got to just do stuff and learn it and figure it out, and like whatever works best for you is what works best for you. But I am curious about your thoughts on that.
I have never been a person who does a lot of autolyse. Like it would just, in my self-taught adventure of sourdough, I always just mixed all my ingredients together in the beginning. But learning about it has led me to thinking that with freshly milled grains, especially, or whole grains, autolyse is actually helpful. Because it gives time for the bran to hydrate. And if the bran isn't hydrated, it is going to disrupt the gluten network. So getting to really get a palatable loaf of bread with a soft interior and that has nice layers and a nice crumb, I think autolyse can be really helpful. And I mean, some people swear by it, and you'll see comparison pictures. This one was autolyse, this one was regular, and this one was autolyse, and it's twice as big. So it really depends on how many steps you want to add. It's not much more of a step. There's also fermentolise, which is where
tell me about this.
Which is where you add your starter and not the salt.
And not the salt.
Yeah.
Yes. That's how I first started learning how to make it. And then I haven't done that probably since I met you in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you guys have to know, Courtney gave this really wonderful speech at the Wise Traditions Conference 4 years ago?
22.
22.
In 22. Okay.
Yeah.
So 3 years ago. And she passed out these magnets that had her like basic recipe on it. And it is the recipe that I have used ever since then. It's on my fridge and I use it all the time. I literally used it earlier today because I'm teaching my mother-in-law how to make sourdough. So I like pulled it off. I was like, this is my friend Courtney's and it's the best. But I've just been like mixing everything together. However, I am now using freshly milled grains and I'm mostly using a hard wheat. So I'm not usually using kamut or einkorn to bake bread with. I might use those to do other things, but usually I'm making bread with a hard wheat. And I have noticed that it is a very dense bread. The dough is very dense. Not much changes. Usually when you make sourdough, if you make it with say bread flour from King Arthur or whoever, that's a refined bread flour, the stages of making the bread changes. The bread goes through this whole like transformative process, and you can see the difference between when you've mixed it together through your stretch and folds all the way to when you're shaping it. The bread that I am making right now doesn't change much through those processes. I'm still doing the same thing, but it doesn't there's not much transformation that's happening. So I'm wondering if maybe I need to consider doing an autolyse or
I would say so. And I think it's also important to understand what happens when you're milling wheat, the science behind it, because there are some things to consider. When you first mill wheat, when it's the freshest it can be, there's a lot of enzyme activity. The bran and the germ are now exposed to the endosperm, the starchy part, and they start working on that starch and fermenting it themselves. The enzymes start breaking down the starch and turning it into sugars. Well, that can really change the way that a sourdough ferments. It can change the way your bread ferments. It might speed it up drastically. The second thing is the gluten network, or the gluten pieces, the pieces of broken gluten after grinding, they need some time to oxidize, actually, to free up the sulfur on the ends of the gluten. And once they've oxidized a little bit, they can do what's called a sulfur to sulfur bond, and the gluten actually sticks together, creating longer strands. So if you take freshly milled flour and immediately go into using it in a recipe, you're not giving it this time to oxidize and actually create these gluten strands. So I'm not saying like you want heavy oxidation, right? That would be bad, right? We don't want to do that to our flour, but you need to let it rest for, I don't know, I recommend 2 hours.
Okay. All right.
2 hours, maybe, you can put it in the fridge. If it's warm from grinding, you can put it in the fridge to cool it down. But I would recommend some time.
Before you add anything else.
Before you do anything else.
Okay.
Let it oxidize. Let the gluten free up the sulfur. The oxygen frees up the sulfur on the ends of the gluten, and they are able to stick together in a sulfur-sulfur bond. I just did all this research. It's very technical, but what
interesting.
Yeah, but it's really interesting.
Okay, so you're saying after you've ground it, let's say just leave it in the bowl and then maybe put it in the fridge for a couple hours and then work with it.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
fascinating.
Give it a little bit of time to, the enzyme activity will decrease in that time, which is good actually, because that will interfere with the fermentation, and the gluten will start bonding back together. And that will allow you to build a better gluten network when you actually do add the water.
Okay, so say could I mill it at night and then in the morning start the sourdough bread process and maybe do an auto-lyse for a couple of hours and then then add the starter, then add the salt.
Yes.
And move on from there.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I think that sounds like a good plan. Yeah.
I'm going to try this. I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Wow, that is fascinating. I have 2 burning questions. The first is, why do you have to wait to cut into a loaf? Why do you have to let it cool?
Because it's torture to let it cool.
Before you cut into it. Like what is the reason for that?
Well, because when you bake starch, they start to gel, and what happens is they absorb water and they swell and they gel. And if you can kind of feel that jelliness right on the inside of a loaf of bread. It's kind of like almost like a slick gumminess, right? So the water molecules are all moving around as steam inside your bread when it comes out of the oven. And you have to actually give it time for that steam to absorb back into the structure of the gelled starch. Otherwise, you're going to get a really gummy loaf that will stale a lot quicker. But if you let the steam kind of go back into that gel, the network, then you're allowing it to kind of keep its shape a little bit more and stay better hydrated. That's the basic rundown of the science behind it. It is very, very difficult, but if you cut into a fresh loaf, be prepared to eat the whole loaf. Ticket right there.
Challenge accepted.
Yes, just accept it. Just eat the whole thing. So
I always think but you want hot bread because that's what makes the butter melt and that's what makes it so delicious. And so in the past when I've done that, I can't resist. So I just cut into it because I'm like, no, I want the melty butter.
Make rolls. Make rolls, Christine, and then you can eat a few when they're warm and let the others, sit until they've gelled. So,
okay.
What was your other burning question, Christine?
Okay. This one, and we're asking all of our grain guests this question, and this is very much, I think, opinion, unless you have some science to back it, which would be even cooler.
Okay.
But there's this belief that if you're freshly milling grains, you actually don't need to use sourdough with them. That just the freshly milled grains in themselves are. Corey, am I saying this correctly? Yes? Yeah? Okay, I want to make sure I'm not missing it. That it's totally okay to use the freshly milled grains as they are. We don't have to use sourdough. So what we want to know is, what are your thoughts on that? Would you still use sourdough with freshly milled grains? Do you recommend it? Am I missing anything, Corey? Is that it?
Well, part of it is that also that within that same school of thought is that phytic acid, which we all have, been taught is something we need to be neutralizing.
Yeah.
Which, because it's an anti-nutrient, is not actually bad for you, that it actually has some health benefits, such as, I think it's fighting some cancers or something like that, so that it's actually a good thing. And this is kind of one of those, there's 2 trains of thought here, right? And it's just, what is your opinion on the matter?
Yeah.
Well, to be perfectly honest, I haven't looked into the benefits of phytic acid, so that would be hard for me to speak to. But from my own opinion, I think it would be even more important to use sourdough with whole grain milling. because you are incorporating the bran. The bran is obviously where all the tannins are, not just phytic acid, but the tannins, the oxalates, the lectins, the potential for any contamination like mold or mildew, so mycotoxins, anything like that, are going to be on the outside of the grain. They're not on the inside. So a white refined flour is going to have a lot less of all of those things. So while souring a white flour is beneficial because it lowers sugar and carb content, it doesn't really do it's not needed as much in a white flour as it is in a whole grain, because you don't have those other components to deal with, because the germ and the bran have been removed in a refined flour. So my personal opinion is it would be even more important to sour a whole grain bread to potentially neutralize not just the phytic acid and free up the minerals in there, but to also neutralize any other potential toxins that are in the grain. Because that's where, that's how a seed defends itself. So there's enzymes in there. Actually, they're enzyme inhibitors, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're in the outside of in the hull, in the kind of the skin of the wheat berry. And so I think my personal opinion is you want to try to neutralize those things so that they don't pass through your digestive system without being utilized, because that's what the enzyme inhibitors will do. That's what the phytic acid is there for. And let me think there's lectins. I said lectins. So yeah, there's just a lot there in the bran. Yeah. So my personal opinion, but I will look into the phytic acid question because that's really interesting, and see what I can find on it. I'd like to do some more research there. Yeah.
I feel like, you do some research and you're like, I figured this out. And then something else pops up and you're like, wait a minute, now I have to consider this. And then something else pops up and then you're like, now I have to look into this. And it's just, that's why we call it a journey, right? Because we're constantly learning new things and constantly taking little side paths. And
yes. And it's really good to reevaluate. And, if you don't know something, to just say, okay, well, I'm going to look at it and see. And I mean, that's how we've gotten ourselves into this mess, right? Is with scientists saying, well, I know what the answer is, and I'm not going to look at any of the other data. I'm not going to. And so we can't live in that world anymore. We all have to be questioning our health. We all have to be questioning what we've been taught, and we all have to keep learning to, keep the evolution of our species going. And so it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have the conversations and really, really try to understand what's happening.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we had, I think, one more question that we wanted to ask you. How are you incorporating cooking, baking, food science, nutritional stuff into what you do with your daughter through your homeschooling or just, home life?
Yeah. Well, when she was little, I used sourdough as a tool to reinforce ideas. So when she was learning her letters, we would make letter-shaped breads, roll out a log.
So cute.
Yeah, roll out a log and make an A, make a B, make a C, and then maybe next time you make bread, do the D, the E, and the F, And so we would play around with sourdough that way. She is able to, feed the starters and bake with them when she wants to. So she's learned how to use, weights and measures, which I think is just really helpful for everyday life. Just getting in the kitchen, feeling confident with that, understanding the difference between weights and measures and how to use them correctly. And I actually run a homeschool club. So last semester I did a 4-week cooking unit. That was really fun. I did fermentation. We made ginger carrots, and I did a whole unit on eggs. We made raw egg ice cream, and it was really fun. We had a really good time. And so I think just bringing food in so that kids have some understanding of how to do it themselves, even maybe what tastes good or what's healthy, it's just nice. It's nice to give them that opportunity to see if there's more interest there.
Go back to the homeschool unit that you did. So you said you did a unit on fermentation,
Yeah,
a
so
unit on
actually
eggs.
the first class I did was we investigated spices and herbs. And what I did is I made flashcards and I brought all of my different spices and I popped popcorn with coconut oil, and the kids sprinkled a little bit of each spice on a kernel of popcorn and ate it and walked down the line trying the spice on their popcorn to see, because a lot of these kids, I mean, they don't even know what paprika is, or they just haven't had it. They're just not exposed. Kids are not exposed to the wonders of the culinary world, and they're fed fish sticks and crackers and whatever, right? So this was really fun for them. A lot of them were kind of like, oh, that's too much, or I don't like that. But then I allowed them to make a little bag of spice mix that they were able to season their own bag of popcorn with. So whatever spices they liked in this, I think there was about 12 different spices that I brought in. And then on the other table, I did a whole tea unit. So I brought in all my dried herbs, different things from my garden, different flowers, and some of the little nice paper tea bags. And they made their own blend of tea after smelling and tasting each one of the different kinds of herbs. They had a tea party where they got to eat their popcorn that they had just made with their spice blend and drink their cup of tea that they made with the things that they wanted to have in it, which were like ginger and elderberries and rose petals and lavender and I don't know, catnip and mint and like all the things, that you have in your pantry. So that was really fun. That was the first unit. And then I did the fermentation unit, and I had grown a big crop of carrots. So I had a ton, and we just did fermented carrots with ginger, which is a great one for kids because they're sweet. The carrots are sweet enough. The ginger adds that little bit of interest. And they all loved them. And I mean, some of these kids had never eaten anything fermented. I brought in some samples. I brought in some of my pickled peas. I did snap peas and snow peas last year, and I did them in like a traditional pickle brine with garlic and dill, like a regular dill pickle. And they're maybe my favorite pickle ever because they're so crunchy. So they're really, really nice. And the kids loved those. And then, a couple weeks later, they got to try their carrots, and that was really fun. Let's see. After that, we did eggs. The first one, we did savory eggs. So I showed them how to hard boil eggs and peel them. And actually, I steam eggs, to really get the shell off nicely. And so I showed them that. And then we made deviled eggs. So I brought in mayonnaise, right, which is egg-based. I taught them, I gave them the recipe to make their own mayonnaise, and they cut up the vegetables and added it and made the deviled eggs themselves and had those with their pickled carrots from the week before. So they had like a little snack. And then the last one we made raw ice cream, and that was a big treat. We did, I showed them how to do some culinary decorations, like little strawberry roses and some chocolate leaves. If you use a camellia leaf and you paint it with melted chocolate, it'll peel right off of the camellia leaf, and it'll be this beautiful leaf shape with all the veins of the leaf. And so they had this bowl of, really nice ice cream with a chocolate leaf and a strawberry rose. So that was a really fun way to end the cooking unit.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I want to attend this homeschool co-op.
Yes, it is. It's a lot of fun. It was a great way to start the year. This is a new thing for me. The last 4 years I was running a wild school. So we did more of like, going around to local parks and building forts and, doing all of that. But this year it's a little bit more academic, but extracurricular. We're not doing too much like book learning there. So.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I
It's a lot
love
of fun.
that.
Yeah. It's
Super
it's
cool.
harder with an only child. I'll just be perfectly honest, because you have to really seek out the opportunities to socialize with other people, and so I've always had to make these things happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that would be harder as a homeschooling family with an only child. I think it would be, you would have to be very intentional
Yes.
about finding people for them to be with and bond with and make friendships with and do all that stuff. Yeah.
It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
100%.
And then on top of all the other jobs that we have around our
Right.
homestead. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I hear you, sister. Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, one last question. What is your favorite recipe on your website?
Oh, that's so hard. That's really hard. Let's see. Because I do other things besides sourdough. Okay, I think the cranberry apple duck liver pate, if you haven't tried that.
Christine's face. Oh my gosh, you guys have to watch the YouTube just for that one. Just for her face.
Now I need cranberries again. Dang it.
And you can use dried cranberries in this recipe. It's actually better with dried cranberries. Okay. So yeah, you saute the apples and the cranberries and the liver and some shallots and herbs and whatnot. And then, and you don't have to use duck liver. I mean, really any pate recipe is going to be okay with any kind of liver that you have available. So you can make it beef, you can make it chicken, you can make it lamb, whatever liver you have. But it is really good with duck liver because it brings that, a little bit of gaminess that works so well with the fruit. Right. So, yeah. And then, you deglaze with a little cognac and add a lot of butter when you put it through the food processor. And it's very, very nice. So I would say the cranberry apple duck liver pate. Can I give one more?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. And then probably my bagel recipe, the sourdough bagels.
Yeah.
They're just so chewy and like soft, and I don't know, they're really good. So that's a fun one to make. Yeah.
So you put the pate on the bagels.
Toast the bagel, put the pate on it. You're good to go.
Now you're talking, Corey.
Yeah.
Yeah. My mom I think it was my mom who found your website first about 5 years ago. And then she introduced it to me. And I mean, we've both been obsessed. We always said there's not a single recipe that we've made on there that has gone wrong. Like it's just like, it feels totally foolproof. And I know everybody has their own blogger that they like to follow for sourdough specifically. And so like, some people are doing Farmhouse on Boone and some people are doing, what's another, I don't know another one, but, I've always been a big fan of Butterforall personally. So
thank you. And I meant to say, tell your mother hello for me.
Oh, definitely. I will.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
It is. It's a lot of fun. And yes, there are a lot of different styles out there, but I do try, I mean, these are all recipes from my heart. I write all my own recipes. And when I have a really good one, I want to publish it. So in fact, I do have a new recipe coming. I wanted to mention it is a old fashioned sourdough einkorn chocolate cake recipe.
Oh yes.
So yes. And it's maybe the most tender and delicious cake I've ever had. So I hope you guys will check it out when it comes out.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm not publishing a whole lot of recipes these days because I'm very, very busy with homeschool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you.
Same.
Yeah.
Okay, let's give everybody your, like, how to get in contact with you, your website, your YouTube, your whatever else you want to share.
Give us all the links.
all the links.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so the website is just butterforall.com. You can, go there and find all my recipes. There's categories, so you can look through and see what you want to look at. I do a lot of different kinds of things, including like cultured dairy and organ meats and things like that. And then I have a YouTube, which is Butterforall. And I have some instructional videos there and some videos on sourdough and some troubleshooting videos. I have a Facebook, Butterforall. I have an Instagram, Butterforall. I have an X account, Butterforall. They're all Butterforall. You can find me on all the places. Pinterest. All my recipes, how you're able to pin on Pinterest. So you can find me at all those. You can email me at Courtney@butterforall.com. That's an easy one to remember. And I'm happy to connect with people. I love it when people send me pictures or just reach out with questions. If somebody has a really in-depth process that they want to do, I'll recommend consultation. But oftentimes I'm happy to just answer questions via email or in a direct message or something like that. It's fun for me and I enjoy it. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so everybody go give Courtney a follow, check out her website.
All of those links will be on the show notes.
Yes.
There's so much more I could have shared about sourdough because it is a really deep subject. There's a lot of different material there. So if you ever have any more questions, please let me know.
I was just telling, and I say this, I think every time we talk about sourdough, but I was telling my mother-in-law this morning that it is a process that has been used to make bread for thousands and thousands of years. Mm-hmm. And across so many different cultures, all the different continents, there's nobody that has a claim on what sourdough is. Like you said earlier, it's not just this artisan loaf. It is an entire style of baking and bread making and not just bread, but all the things. And because of that, I think that you should just, if you feel like you're struggling with making sourdough, like just realize that you can't screw it up because it's just been done so many times by so many different people forever that there's not one way to make it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You can kind of invoke the ancestors, right? When you're making bread, because you can just feel that this is like the traditional way that it was done. And did they have recipes online? No, right?
No, they had them painted on the walls. Like,
and I mean, so many of our cultures and traditions we're all word of mouth and it was just an evolution. And so you can just pick up wherever you are and start. That's a really good thing to be able to do.
Yeah. I love that. Absolutely. Just start, dive in, go for it.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So wrapping up, Christine is at Nourish the Littles. I'm at For Nutrient's Sake. The podcast is at Modern Ancestral Mamas. We're on YouTube, Spotify, what is it called? Apple Podcasts. Yeah. And you can leave comments on YouTube and you can leave reviews on Apple and you can like it on Spotify and you can share it across whatever social medias you like to use. Any and all of that helps the show so much and gets it to other people. We love you guys and we love Courtney and we love bread and we're signing off.
It was really a pleasure to be here. Thank you both so much.
Yes, thank you, Courtney.